TESOL Arabia, and welcome to a very, very special year of the conference. My name is Nehal Sadek, and I work at ETS, Educational Testing Service. I work on the TOEFL iBT writing and reading sections, and today I'm with you to talk about the independent task and the prompts that we found work on the test. We've got 30 minutes. Believe it or not, this is take 2. I already recorded the whole presentation, but of course something had to go wrong, so bear with me here. Today we'll be talking about what a prompt is. We're going to start off by defining what a prompt is. And then we're going to move into some important distinctions between prompts in a classroom setting versus prompts in testing or on a time task setting. We also are going to distinguish between skill prompts versus subject matter content prompts. Then we're going to move on to talk about the components of a prompt, how to write a prompt, what parts should be in the prompt. And then we're going to move on to talking a little bit about the TOEFL iBT independent writing task, and more importantly, about the characteristics that we found make a successful prompt. And the idea being that you might want to consider these characteristics when you are crafting your own prompts, whether in the classroom or on a test. So let's jump in right away. What is a prompt? It's one of those very few words that carry its meaning. A prompt prompts you to do something, and that's what exactly it should be seen as. A prompt is intended to invite students to think about and develop a perspective about a topic on a constructed response task. So we're talking about constructed response tasks, listening, not listening and reading, rather speaking and writing. And the prompt should invite students to think about something and develop their perspective on it. The words that jump to me in this definition would be invite, think, and develop. And of course, we're talking about constructed responses. But the three important words to me is a prompt should be an invitation to think about a topic and develop your response. So with that in mind, let's take a look at some important distinctions between, first of all, content questions or prompts, and by that I mean prompts in subject matter classes, and second language skill prompts like ESL, speaking and writing prompts. As we all know, subject matter questions, they have more specific content requirements in addition to language expectations. So when a professor, let's say in a philosophy class, assigns a paper on a specific topic, they expect to see certain content covered. Their focus is on the content and the subject matter, although they would also take a look at the language while they're grading their papers. In that case, these kinds of prompts are more prescriptive in nature. Writers or students are expected to deliver certain content, and they are evaluated accordingly. On the other hand, ESL prompts on speaking and writing, they allow for multiple ways to write an answer, and I will just scratch out answer here and replace it by a response, because there is no correct answer on second language prompts. There are different responses, as we've seen in the definition, because we all have different perspectives, therefore there will be different responses. But in comparison to content questions, ESL prompts the focus is more on language facility rather than content. Another important distinction is the distinction between ESL prompts in a classroom situation where you give class assignments versus prompts on time tasks or tests, as is the case in the TOEFL. Of course, it's time. The time factor here, time constraints, make it less, make have more lenient expectations in terms of ideas. So because the test takers have limited time to respond, we do not expect them to come up with brilliant ideas and develop them in a very sophisticated manner, because we're not testing logical reasoning on our test. But if that's your situation, that's a different case. But in general, in a classroom context, students have all the time to go research, discuss the topic with someone else, brainstorm ideas, revise, and so on. But that's absolutely not the case, of course, on a time task. So here, our expectations in terms of ideas and even language is not as high as it would be in a classroom context. So what are we focusing on today? We're going to talk about components of a prompt, how to craft a prompt in a classroom or even on a time task. And also, we're going to talk about the characteristics of a successful prompt on a test or a time task. And I'm going to be focusing more on the TOEFL iBT writing, independent writing task, but the characteristics we came up with can easily be applied and tailored to other tests and time tasks. So I would normally stop here for questions, but of course that's not going to happen. And but I would be very happy to answer questions in the comments section after you watch the video. Let's jump into the first part of the presentation, or one of the main takeaways that I hope you take from this presentation, and that would be how to craft a prompt, the components of a prompt. So the components of a prompt in a way parallel the definition that we covered earlier. So there are three parts. Part one is intended to invite the writers or speakers. Part two helps them think more about the topic. And part three gives them the nitty-gritty details and helps them develop and gives them directions. So part one sets the scene. Part two helps them brainstorm ideas, and part three gives them specific directions. So that's all very abstract. Let's take a closer look at each part and see an example. So part one, setting the scene. This is usually a general sentence or statement that generally introduces the topic, kind of raises the schemata or helps the student know what they're going to be writing about. An example of this would be something about online education, very current. Something along the lines of online education has become an important part of our lives. There are no specific requirements here, nothing about include this or that, or nothing to help them brainstorm ideas. It's just a general topic sentence, if you might say, that introduces the topic. Now, part two, you're helping them brainstorm idea. And I would say that this is probably the part that I find missing in many prompts. So in this part, you can give them an image, a series of images, or I would say, or you can include some probing questions and statements that helps them brainstorm ideas about the topic. Remember, in a classroom situation, sometimes in a classroom situation, the teacher does this in the form of a class discussion. So they discuss and brainstorm together as a group, but it wouldn't hurt also to put it in writing when you're assigning the prompt. Example would be something, again, going back to the online education prompt. You can give them an image or some images, like for some images that show pro online education, some images showing people against, and you could also include things like think about some of the benefits of virtual learning, think about the challenges. So in a way, you're giving them ideas, you're also helping them organize their response. Moving on to part 3, and here we're talking more about formatting issues. So in part 3, you're giving them directions to help them by providing your expectations and the requirements. So if we go back to the online education example, part 3 of a prompt on online education would look something like this. Write an essay explaining your position on online learning. So you've guided them after you've given them some ideas to cover. You've told them, I'd like you to tell me what you think about online education. You're also giving them the word expectations, word count expectations. So again, these are the 3 parts that it's good practice and best practice to include when you're writing your prompt. As I mentioned earlier, I usually see parts 1 and 3 in prompts, but I rarely see part 2 in writing. As I said, people will use teachers discuss it in the classroom, but I rarely see it written down in the prompt itself. Okay, again, I would stop here for questions. After covering the components of crafting a prompt, I'd like us to move now to the TOEFL iBT independent writing task to discuss the characteristics of a successful prompt on a timed task. But before we do that, let's just give a very general or an overview of the TOEFL iBT independent task. This is a task that asks test takers to respond in writing, to express and support their opinion on knowledge, based on their knowledge and experience. So not background information, just what they know and their own experiences. They're given 30 minutes only to prepare, write, and review. And I'm trying here to set the scene for the characteristics that we're going to cover later. And the test includes only one independent item. Test also includes an integrated item where they listen to a lecture and read a passage, and they're asked to synthesize the information in writing, but that's not what we're here for today. We're here for the independent task. What's being measured is basically the test taker's ability to write in an academic environment. And by academic, we mean first-year university students or graduate students in English-speaking universities. Okay, so now we'll move to characteristics of a good prompt on a second language time task. And these characteristics, let me give you some background. These characteristics or criteria, if you'd like to call them, were derived from a study that we did on our prompts, which we try out. We try out our prompts before we administer them to the world. So some of the prompts that we try out, we get responses from tryout students to see whether the prompts work or not, so as to decide whether to administer them or not. So some of them work and some of them don't. And what we did is we took a look at the ones that don't, and we categorized them into different themes. And from there, we came up with the characteristics that you're going to see in a minute that we ensure when we are developing new independent items. So this is based on actual research. And the reason I'm sharing this with you today is I'm hoping that you could tailor these criteria or characteristics to your own environments. Okay, here they are. So a successful prompt on a timed task should have a topic that's not too narrow, and the topic should not be too abstract. The topic also should not require any background knowledge or information. The language used in the prompt should be accessible. The topic you're asking your students or test takers to write about should be something universal that they are aware of. Remember, the TOEFL IBT is administered worldwide, so we want the topic to be something that everybody would have something to say about it, and it should be academic. And academic is very specific to the nature of our test. But if you have something similar in nature in terms of it being academic, then that would apply to you. But if you're uh, testing writing in a K-12 environment, maybe this academic characteristic doesn't apply. And that's why I'm emphasizing that these criteria are applicable to our TOEFL iBT independent task. However, they can be tailored to your own contexts. Let's take a look at each of these characteristics and take a look at an example. So the first one, a successful prompt on a test or a time task should not be too narrow. And this is a big no-no. Remember, they only have 30 minutes in TOEFL iBT, maybe less on other tests, to write a response, to come up with ideas and to write it and revise it. So when you give them a topic that's too narrow, it's very unfair for them. They don't have ideas on that topic. So it's not because they can't write, it's just because the prompt itself is too narrow. Let's take a look at an example of a topic that's probably too narrow. For example, if you ask your test takers or students to write about their position on giving gifts to teachers, it's a very narrow topic. Either you're for it or against it. Not much to say about it. However, you could make it a little bit better and say teachers are actually seen as a gift. Discuss some of the qualities of a good teacher. This is something that I definitely have more to say about than I would on my position on giving gifts to teachers. Okay, moving on to another characteristic, which is a successful prompt should have a topic that's not too abstract. And this again goes in line with the idea of being fair to our test takers. We want to ensure that they have something to say about it, the topic, and abstract topics are usually very hard to write about. So an example of an abstract topic would be something like define happiness and the importance of well-being. A very abstract topic which might work for a philosophy class, but not on a second language timed task for people who have English as their second language. So, too abstract. Could we make it better? Maybe. Maybe we could say, you could give them choices, you could give them a context. So a way to fix an abstract or a vague topic is by giving a specific scenario that's not too narrow. You don't want to fall in that pitfall up there. You want to give them a context that would make the topic meaningful, but yet wouldn't make it too narrow. So you could say, which of the following do you think would make people happy? X, Y, or Z. So you're actually helping them with ideas. They can write about one of these, two of these, all of these, something different, but at least you provided them with some input to help them think, which it would be part two of your prompt. Moving along, your topic should not require background knowledge or specific subject matter knowledge, because that would be unfair. You would be favoring a group of people who have knowledge about this, and that would be unfair to our test takers, and we don't want to do that. So make sure your topic, the topic or the prompt that you choose does not require background knowledge. And that's something we are very, very careful about when we're developing our prompts on the TOEFL. For example, we would never ask our test takers to discuss the factors that led to the Industrial Revolution. That's a very specific prompt that requires information. People who've read about it would know. But now you wouldn't be testing their writing proficiency. You would be testing their background knowledge. And that's not the construct that you're testing here. So again, be very aware of what you want from your students. And on a time task specifically, this wouldn't be one of them. In a classroom situation, maybe you've had them read about the topic and now you want them to summarize the information. But again, that's a whole other scenario. We're talking about a very specific scenario here which is an ESL timed task. And more specifically, I'm giving you lessons learned from the TOEFL iBT writing task. Okay, again, another characteristic is the language that you use in the prompt should be accessible. So we're not testing their the students' vocab comprehension. We're testing their ability to use vocabulary in writing or speaking, a range of it. So the prompt itself should not have difficult words. You want to ensure that they understood the prompt. But if you give them difficult words in the prompt, then they don't know what you're asking them to write about, and then they won't have anything to say about it. For example, if you see a topic like this, a prompt like this, some people celebrate productive exchange, globalization, very hard words for ESL students, unless in a classroom situation, if you've taught them that, that's a different scenario. But on the TOEFL, we don't, we want to make sure that our test takers understand the prompt. And besides, the word celebrate here is used in a secondary meaning that many ESL learners would not even understand and might confuse with celebrations or festivities, and then they would respond to that, and then you would have a topic, a response that's off topic, which actually is based on an unfair prompt. So be careful with the language you use in the prompt, unless your goal or your objective is to teach that language. Another big issue we have is to choose topics that are universal in nature. Remember, the TOEFL iBT is administered worldwide to people from different cultures and countries of different backgrounds. So we want to make sure that the topic we're asking our test takers to write about are universal. And I would say you might want to tailor that if you're in a specific country and you're 100% sure that your test takers know this information about the country, and then it's fine to ask them that. But with TOEFL, it's a different story. So, for example, we would never ask our test takers to write about their position on leasing a car or buying a car, because the idea of leasing a car in itself is not a universal concept. So we have to double check that the concept or the topic we're asking them about is one that is shared worldwide. Finally, the topic we ask on the TOEFL needs to be academic in nature. And by academic, I don't mean very scientific journal research papers. I basically mean something that's campus related that you would expect students at university to be able to write about. And again, this is one that might not apply to your context if you're at a school environment, or you're teaching writing or speaking, general speaking and writing, and not academic. An example of a topic that we would not include on TOEFL iBT or any academic test for that nature would be something along the lines of describe the menu for a satisfying dinner in a restaurant. Might be a good prompt for a general English test, but not for an academic English test, which the TOEFL measures. Okay, so here they are again, the 6 criteria or characteristics that we make sure that are taken care of on TOEFL iBT independent writing prompts, and that I think can be tailored and applied in other timed task contexts and tests, and things to consider when you are crafting your prompts, in addition to the components that we discussed earlier when you're crafting your prompts, the 3 components and the characteristics. And that's all, folks, for today. I'd love to continue the conversation in the comments section below. Now, that's something I would never have imagined myself saying one day, but here we are. Let's try and comment below with your takeaway from the presentation or any other questions or comments you have. I've also posted an activity in the description box below. I'd love to see your responses to those questions of the activities. And I hope you found this presentation helpful. My email was shown on the first slide. I'd be happy to correspond with anyone about anything related to the presentation or any other TOEFL iBT matter for that. Thank you again for your participation in the comment section, and I look forward to reading your comments below. Thank you.